Health Matters with Paul Rosen.
Our diets, our Western diets in America are just really, you just don't realize how poor they really are.
What would you say to others who would like to feel better?
Sometimes you need to find the instruction. That's where the testing and everything comes in, because without that knowledge, there's no way I could have got to the point where I'm at today.
Straight talk about health.
And then I start preaching and telling them what I've been doing. And this guy named Paul Rosen has changed my life.
With your host, Paul Rosen.
By the way, the information contained in this program is not approved by the FDA, nor intended to treat, diagnose, or claim to cure any medical condition or disease as defined by Western medicine. However, skilled practitioners of many disciplines have found nutrition response testing to be a highly reliable supportive technology for assessing the health and fitness of the body's functional system.
Let's get to work here. Artificial sweeteners, why are they so bad? Or are they? Did I just kind of go to the end of the story right there? I think I did. You know, maybe you had a big buildup going on.
Oh, my God.
Well, let's talk about artificial sweeteners. First, what are they? Where do we find artificial
Well,
sweeteners?
actually, I think the best thing to do is start with what does artificial mean?
Okay, let's
in this
start with
particular
that.
case, artificial sweetener. It's just it is a substance that is not found naturally, not found in nature, but instead is man-made, man-concocted, put together in a laboratory.
All right.
The reason why that's so important is because we have not figured out yet, with all of our knowledge, to be able to produce something that one might put in the body as a substitute for ingredients, food in particular, that is created in nature, that actually works the same as what that natural product, or how that natural product works.
So why do we create artificial ingredients for our foods?
Money.
If we create artificial ingredients, can we create the foods in a way that costs less or is more efficient?
Right.
You know,
money.
Okay, that's it.
Money.
Period. All right.
Patent.
That's simple.
Patent a product.
All right. That's simple then.
Honestly, I mean, it's just it's oftentimes you hear it said, if you want to know the origin, of something, follow the money, and it's the same thing true with artificial sweeteners. Now, of course, someone would argue that, well, what about a diabetic? What about? I mean, how many people have been their lives have been improved by utilizing artificial sweeteners? And you know how I would answer that?
How would you answer that?
None.
Zero.
Zip.
None.
Right? Zip. Because if you're a diabetic, you shouldn't be eating any grains, fruit, or sugar anyway. And the reason I say that, as I have said that many times, is because a person's body that is already incapable of handling high glycemic foods, which is indicative of high blood sugars, shouldn't be eating those things, because their system, for one reason or another, is simply disabled from handling them normally. So, unfortunately, the doctors...
Before you continue with that point, Paul, I have to agree with you from just my layman's point of view, in the sense that if your body resists sweeteners to begin with, if you are diabetic, I don't see how an artificial sweetener makes any difference whatsoever, but maybe it has to do with the chemical composition or something like that.
Well, some would argue that these sweeteners are not handled in the same way as sugar, and the body is not affected in the same way. And I would answer to that question, yes. What you've done is you've introduced the possibility of more side effects.
So you've just taken one set of problems and replaced them with another. You haven't solved...
Enhanced them.
Oh, you've made it worse.
Enhanced them.
You've made it worse, actually. Well,
and so let's take a look at the history.
Okay, let's do that.
Of artificial sweeteners. Let's start with a very well-known one, saccharin. Most everybody has heard about saccharin.
Well, everybody of a certain age has heard of saccharin.
This was discovered in 1879 by chemists who were researching toluene derivatives. What's toluene?
That's a good question. What
toluene is produced in the process of making gasoline from crude oil and in making coke from coal. It's used in creating pig paints, paint thinners, fingernail polish, lacquers, adhesives, and rubber. In
So
other words, it ain't edible.
Yeah, well, let me make sure I understand. This was the derivative for saccharin? Or the saccharin was derived from that? Mm-hmm. Wow. That doesn't sound real appetizing to me at all.
And it was banned over 100 years ago after laboratory studies demonstrated that saccharin caused bladder cancer in rats. But for unknown reasons, the FDA rescinded the ban in 1991. And they pronounced that they rescinded it because rats and humans had physiological differences, making rats more susceptible to the saccharin's toxicity.
Now, you say this ban went into effect at a certain point. I remember that ban, Paul, when I was a kid. It was, late 60s, early 70s, when some study came out saying that saccharin causes cancer. So suddenly all these products with saccharin were no longer allowed on the market.
The interesting thing is that there was a law passed in 1958. It was called the Food Additives Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
This was known as the Delaney Clause, 1958, which set a zero tolerance for any chemical found to cause cancer in animal testing. Despite that, the FDA went against that and reinstated the ability to use the saccharin in 1991.
Was saccharin reconstituted in some way so that it was no longer like the old saccharin?
You mean lipstick on a pig?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, cosmetically or otherwise, was this ingredient changed in some way that would meet the FDA's approval?
Based on the 1958 Delaney Clause, I don't know of anything that's changed that. If somebody out there has done some work on that or studies, I'd like to know. So that I won't talk about it in this vein. So
they being the FDA, allowed saccharin back onto the market in 1991. Do we now have products on the market, on our store shelves, with saccharin?
As far as I know.
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
Amazing.
Well, it's amazing to me,
it's pretty
and maybe
astonishing, and it's pretty damn scary.
Yeah, it could be seen that way. It could be seen as horrifying, especially for those who are old enough to remember the saccharin ban and all those stories on the air and in the news about how saccharin was going to kill you.
Well, this is no different, than I was just listening to a story on the way in today about lead. Everybody knows that lead is poisonous, and in fact, there was a doctor who spent his entire professional life trying to raise the alarm bells and change the way the country thought about lead. You remember lead in gasoline,
yes,
for example.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, that was ultimately stopped. But today, when the lead issue basically vanished from the news cycle, right, the elimination of lead essentially was sort of set on the back burner. And we still have kids today that are, many of them, that are killed by, that are maimed or somehow compromised, certainly mentally, because that's what lead does, primarily with children. It decreases mental function.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Still today, there's still, so it's now back in the news cycle a little bit, for the fact that despite the fact that lead is absolutely a known poison, it has not been eliminated, from use in various types of products and sources, and and in the water and those types of things.
That's
still
amazing.
Not.
I know back in the day when ethyl gasoline was manufactured, which was a lead-based gasoline, as you know, before it was banned, there were workers in those factories who became desperately ill, and great attempts, or I should say, great efforts were put forth to make sure that no connection was discerned between their employment in the factory and the fact that they were growing sick. And that was one of the first things that led to the eventual banning of lead-based gasoline.
And now take a look at Flint.
Yeah, exactly. The lead in the water in Flint, which is a whole fiasco.
And of course that wouldn't happen if they had any power.
Right.
I mean, you won't find that in San Marin.
You're right. If it's a wealthy area, you're not going to see the same set of circumstances.
Let's get to the next artificial sweetener, cyclamate. You've heard of cyclamate?
I have. As a matter of
Sweet
fact.
and Low is a product utilizing that. In 1937, while researching fever-reducing drugs. The chemist laid his cigarette down on a lab bench. It was kind of a serendipitous thing. And when he placed the cigarette back into his mouth, he discovered a sweet taste. Voila! A new sweetener. But in 1969, cyclamate was banned by the FDA because research indicated that it caused cancer in laboratory mice.
Well, the mice are having a rough time of it during this whole artificial
mice always have a rough
sweetener
time.
era.
They're a stand-in for, for so many of the chemical monstrosities developed by, Frankensteins all over the world.
Now, besides these problems with health, the impact that the sweeteners have on health, I understand, are there addictive properties even worse than regular sweeteners? Because in the case of saccharin, according to information I have, it's many times sweeter than natural sweeteners.
That's an interesting question. I don't have enough information to say whether they're more addictive or less addictive. Then I assume you're referencing sugar,
right?
For example.
Right. But I guess.
But sugar cravings are, yes, there is a certain amount of addiction. Mm-hmm. I would say that's more related to the potential addictive quality of human beings in general.
Right.
Right. Every person, has a tendency to be addicted to something.
Right. I think in terms of sweeteners, and I don't know, but I would think that people say they have a sugar addiction. That's more psychological than anything else.
Well, there is a physiology to it, but it's really very simple to fix. Having a sugar craving is really the symptom of the fact that you're not providing your body with the nutrient density that it's actually looking for.
So what you need is a sugar substitute, something that's not sweet.
No, what you need to know what your nutritional deficiencies and barriers to healing are, including specifically the foods that you need to include in your diet and the foods you need to exclude from your diet. And you can fix the sugar cravings in a flash. You've heard many times, many of our patient interviews who have had sugar cravings who were amazed at how quickly that craving disappeared.
What other artificial sweeteners should we be on the lookout for?
Probably one of the best well known is aspartame.
Aspartame. So what's so dangerous about that?
A product that contains aspartame, NutraSweet. Some people may recognize that. Discovered in 1965.
So is NutraSweet its own sweetener containing aspartame, or?
Oh, it is aspartame.
Oh, it is aspartame. Okay.
And now, but it's a trademark product. A trademark product.
Okay. So aspartame is just like
other companies could have licensed aspartame and put their own stamp on it, but.
So NutraSweet did that. Here's the thing about Pepsi. They were using aspartame as the sweetener in Diet Pepsi.
Mm-hmm.
And a few years ago, or beginning in 2015, they decided to shun aspartame and not use it in their products anymore because they heard about these health risks, and they made a big public show of no longer using that particular ingredient in their Diet Pepsi. However, Diet Pepsi drinkers are not pleased. They say the new artificial sweeteners used in that particular product make the drink taste just not as good.
Well, the unfortunate thing is that soda drinkers in general, if they really understood the facts of how soda affects your body, would be really unhappy with the entire product in general, let alone the diet product. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's like saying a cigarette smoker is unhappy with the new tobacco flavor that so-and-so put in. Both products are inherently dangerous, meaning that they are inherently, they inherently create a compromise with respect to a human body's health.
Mm-hmm.
Bearer of bad news or not, like it or not, that's just the way it is.
And I know we'll cover
Head out of the bubble. Facts. 1965. Now consumed by over 250 million people, aspartame. Found mostly in sodas, as you alluded to. Again, while researching this drug, this one was for gastric ulcers. So they were putting together various different types of chemical compounds looking for a wonder drug for ulcers, and instead they came up with this aspartame. And again, it was happenstance. A chemist just kind of licked his fingers after having, been exposed to this particular compound, found that it was sweet. Turns out that laboratory studies revealed brain tumors in animals, flawed experimental data, and the absence of pre-marketing trials on humans. And despite vigorous protests by FDA scientists, aspartame was given the go-ahead.
Really? Now that's interesting. That is horrifying, too. Even scientists within the FDA were saying, don't use this stuff.
This is why I've said for many years now that you really have to fade at the FDA. We simply cannot rely on them as a true source of information. It's very difficult to, filter out what's garbage and what's not. So, nix the source of information completely. Interesting, aspartame was also found to be an ant poison. How did
they discover that? Were ants drinking Diet Pepsi or something?
Yeah, right. Feeding Diet Pepsi to ants.
Okay, so, it kills ants. That's probably not a good sign as to it being something you want to put into your body, right?
Chemically, aspartame breaks down into methanol, or wood alcohol, in our bloodstream. The safe consumption of this substance, that is methanol, 7.8 milligrams per day, and yet a can of diet soda contains almost 16.
Wow, and that's just
more
one
than
can.
Double.
Yeah, that's just one can. I mean, a lot of diet soda drinkers, I think, would admit they have more than one drink per day.
Methanol itself spontaneously breaks down into formaldehyde, and we've talked formaldehyde in the past.
We sure have.
The chemical used for?
Stuffing animals.
Embalming.
Yep.
Right? Which is where the source of, stop utilizing these artificial sweeteners, in particular the aspartame. Otherwise, you're embalming yourself while you're alive. Literally.
So if you have some game that you want to stuff, why go to the expense of a taxidermist? Just give that game a whole bunch of Coke.
Side effects associated with aspartame: headaches, change in mood, vomiting, nausea, change in vision, seizures, convulsions, fatigue, weakness, sleep problems, hallucinations, abdominal pain and cramps, diarrhea, memory loss. Oh my gosh. Sounds like a commercial for a medication, doesn't it?
It sure does. And those are, obviously very serious conditions. I think memory loss and long-term impacts like that are to be considered when these things are, in the food you eat.
Monsanto, our chemical buddy, right, basically came out in 1985 with something called Neotame.
Which is what?
Essentially a replacement for aspartame.
So there was awareness all the way back in the 80s, we're talking 30 years ago, that maybe there should be a substitute for aspartame. And the interesting thing about that is this, because I can guess where you're going with that thought. Maybe this substitute was just as bad, and yet aspartame is still on the market.
Monsanto developed Neotame in 1985 because, ready for it?
Ready.
Its patent for aspartame was expiring.
Okay. So it had a cap on it, so they had to come up with something else that they could control exclusively, correct?
So you asked me a question at the very first part of this particular segment, which was a while ago. Why artificial sweeteners? There's your answer.
It always comes down to the money, right?
The money.
Okay. I think food producers would say, in terms of any artificial ingredient, including artificial sweeteners, if we could make more product, and if we can at least claim to make, say, sweetened products available to people who otherwise may not be able to eat them, what's the harm? Your response would be?
Oh, my gosh. Do I need to run through the list again?
Oh no, not really.
And
it's a rhetorical question.
We're going to hear from a patient of mine, young teenager.
Olivia.
Early, yeah. Actually, she wasn't a teenager at the time, I believe.
So she had
Just
some
prior to it.
nasty stuff going on directly due to artificial sweeteners in her food. Let me ask you this, Paul, then, as kind of a conclusion. How can we avoid artificial sweeteners? What can we as consumers and shoppers do to make sure these nasty ingredients are not in our products?
Eat fresh food.
Well, that's simple enough. That's it. Thanks for coming, folks. One more note, you can get a free chapter of Paul Rosen's book, The Missing Piece. Just go to his website, acunatural.com, acunatural.com, and fill out the dialog box that pops up. Rest assured, no information you provide will ever be shared with anyone else. So, what are you waiting for? Get going on your personal road to wellness today.